Well, on Monday, President Pierre Nkurunziza set a November 7th deadline for Burundians to voluntarily give up their guns or risk being dealt with as enemies of the nation. After months of protests over his re-election in July and a failed coup, on Friday, hundreds of Burundians started fleeing their homes in fear that the 5-day ultimatum by the president for people to hand over illegal firearms may spark violence. In Bujumburu's Matukura neighborhood, hundreds marched away with belongings perched on their heads or at the back of their bicycles. The residents, most of them too terrified to speak to the media, say they feared what will happen after the Saturday deadline. Now, in a statement, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, said President Nkurunziza's 5-day ultimatum for people to hand over illegal firearms or be treated as enemies of the state may spark extensive bloodshed in the coming days. For more on the U.S. position, Thomas Perriello, Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, joins us live via Skype from the U.S. State Department. Mr. Perriello, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, somebody would think, asking citizens to hand over illegal firearms is one way of trying to achieve peace in a country. Why is that a bad idea from the U.S. position?
Well, first of all, the African Union, the UN Security Council, and others have been very clear that the solution here is a political solution based on a dialogue in Kampala, led by President Museveni. There is still time for leaders both within the government and in the opposition to pull people back from escalating violence and get to the peace talks. And the kind of language that talks of deadlines, senior government officials talking about pulverizing and exterminating those who don't deserve to live, this is not the rhetoric that pulls people back from the brink. There's still time for leaders on all sides to call for peace. When President Nkurunziza has done that in the past, for example, after the unlawful assassination of General Adolf, people did heed that call. So this is a time where leaders really need to speak up and move us back from that escalatory language.
And you know, there have been all these calls from the U.S. and the African Union and other leaders worldwide. But President Nkurunziza went ahead. He won this election. Is entrenching himself in power. What are the next steps now from the U.S. and other powers?
Well, I think there are very few people in Burundi, probably even in the government, who wouldn't rather turn the clock back a year to when Burundi was a relative success story. We were talking about how to build economic growth and see the first democratic transition under this constitution. And instead, we're in a situation where we have a country on the brink of civil war, under economic sanctions, and facing tremendous economic, humanitarian, and security difficulties. As the African Union noted, that was due in large part to President Nkurunziza's decision to pursue non-inclusive elections. And we are where we are now. Others decided to attempt coups. These are not the sorts of things that put a country on the path to stability. But there is still a chance, no matter how narrow the window, to pull back and get the peace talks started and reset Burundi's progress that it's made since the Arusha Accords.
Have you managed to reach out to the Burundian leadership, and what are they telling you?
You know, I've reached out personally as well as our ambassador on the ground. We maintain open lines of communication with the government of Burundi, as well as those in civil society and the opposition. We want to be partners with the people of Burundi and the government of Burundi, but that can only happen under circumstances that have the country on a path to peace and an inclusive peace. And so much work was done over the last decade and more on ethnic reconciliation and building strong institutions such as the military there. And so much of that is fraying now. And so now is a point for leaders who care deeply about their country to call people for peace and call people to get to Kampala for the talks. And that's something, again, the African Union, the East African community have all supported.
Now, there's those who say that, there are other people involved in that conflict from that region. Do you get that sense, or is this just mere speculation?
Well, we are extremely eager for all of the neighbors to play a constructive role, whether they're neighbors that are closer to President Nkurunziza and the government or closer to the opposition, that they can be voices in their ears right now saying, we can't stand with you if you elevate this to full-on operations as some are threatening. They can be some of the most powerful voices that are pulling this back to a place where they get to a dialogue table in Kampala under President Museveni's leadership and find a path forward. So as is often the case, we think the neighborhood has a particularly important role to play. and they know better than anyone what the stakes are, the human stakes and the regional stakes of this escalating. That's why I think you are seeing more and more leadership from the region to try to push towards a peaceful solution.
Well, Mr. Perriello, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Thomas Perriello is the special envoy for the Great Lakes region.